I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. Welcome to another episode of Women's Health Unplugged. We have not had a guest yet on our third season, and so you've been gifted a whole bunch of solo episodes in a row, but I couldn't be more excited to have our guest on today, joined by Dr. Jody Carrington, who is a psychologist. We're going to have a hard time picking what we talk about today. Jody's background and expertise is in burnout and connection and all the hats and roles that women play and how that lead to us struggling with our mental health and feeling so disconnected from each other. Jody, I'm so grateful that we have the chance to chat today. I feel like this is going to be a great episode.
Jordan, I've been looking forward to this for a really long time. So I'm so excited to dive in.
Tell me, and I ask everyone this question, like, why this topic for you? Like, how did you get here? What's the path that you walked down? I'd love to hear that story so that we can hear what's made you so passionate about this particular area.
So I grew up in a little town in Viking. It's called Viking, Alberta, Canada. So 1,200 people. And I can tell you the first and last name of every teacher I had. My bus driver's name was Stan Chomick, and he was a crotchety old son of a bitch, and he picked us up every day from grade 3 to grade 12. I go on to get a PhD, but I remember nothing about what I learned in those classrooms. The literacy and the numeracy is beyond me, but I remember the way people made me feel. And in a very privileged position, I grew up straight, white, able-bodied in this town. And I have, over the course of my time, really realized how important it is that relationships come back to the basic things of healing, of making us the healthiest that we can be. And so I spent some time, I was a civilian member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for 2 years and started to learn about organizational stress and what it looks like when organizations don't look after their people. I have a huge love for first responders. And so I did my master's and my PhD around police stress, police psychology. And then I did my residency in Nova Scotia, and they said, you have to do a rotation with kids. And I said, listen, I'm not a huge fan of children. And they said, you're kind of like one. We think you'd be a good fit. And I fell in love with the tiny humans. And I did an extra, like a bit of a postdoc in child psychiatry. And my first job was at the Alberta Children's Hospital on a locked psychiatric inpatient unit for kids, where the hitters, the kickers, the biters, all the ones that tell you to F off, that's where they live. And I adore them. And they taught me the most because for a very long time in my training and mostly in society, what we ask often about other people is what is wrong with you. And so we would admit these kids for 6 to 8 weeks and we would ask this question, what's wrong with this one? You got the ADHD or the ODD or the LMNOP. But you know what we'd never ask is what happened to this one. And it was so interesting when you shifted the context, when you got the story, it was the prerequisite for empathy, because then we had the ability to sink in. And when I left the children's, I'd met my husband. It took me a long time to land a husband, but I got one. And what happened is we had 3 kids really fast. So we had our first kid, and I thought I wasn't a huge fan of motherhood. I love my children. I'm not really a fan of trying to balance the role of, being this mom that I waited so long to be. And then all of my work and my research. And so then I went back to work quite quickly. And then we got pregnant with twins spontaneously, which is just such a gift. I'm so grateful. I love these children. And so we had 3 kids under 2. And my husband was concerned. He's a feedlot nutritionist by training. So he likes to fix cows, and his wife. And he said, I know what'll help you. Let's move closer to my mother. So we picked up those 3 babies and moved to a little town in the middle of Alberta, just kind of how we both grew up. And I started a private practice and coach in hockey. And then I started to consult in rural Alberta with all the really tough kids because they were my jam. And then I started to speak about it. And then I wrote a book and it became a national bestseller. And then I wrote another book and it went big too. And then we just launched our last one, Feeling Seen. And now I speak oh gosh, probably like 150 times a year around the world. And it is, I think the underlying message is we weren't meant to do any of this alone. And we've never been this disconnected in the history of the free world. For the first time, you know this better than me, for the first time in history, emotional illness is killing us at faster rates than physical illness. And we've never had this much access to research and, resources. But we just can't seem to get this relationship thing um, right. And it is the thing that is the answer to everything.
I love, there's so many things that you said in there, and I really identify with that, like that motherhood piece, right? I think that's one where, as soon as you said that, you don't love that I love my kids, but I don't know if I love what it was supposed to be around motherhood. I think that's so nice to hear from another person. Actually, it really like normalizes that experience. But there's kind of two things in there that you mentioned. It's funny, like that empathy piece. I've always loved that story, and I think it was on Oprah, honestly, where they were talking about like the person at the stoplight in front of you that doesn't go, right? And you're late for work and you're like, come on, this person like literally is parked in front of me, and you're laying on the horn and you're like, this piece of shit, like, why don't you go? Until you realize that like their kids in the backseat choking, right? And then all of a sudden, like, you're putting your car in park and hazard lights and you're getting out and you're trying to help them. And it's like we can't seem to contextualize each other's stories, like, or we don't have that ability to wonder about each other's stories until it's like being spit on us in the face. And empathy comes from us being able to like play in that possibility of what could have possibly be going on with that other person. I would love for you to dive in with that a little bit for
Yeah,
us.
for sure. Well, so the fundamental basis of being able to have empathy, the prerequisite is something called emotional regulation. And I think as a psychologist, we've taught, I was trained lots around the behavioral model, right? So if we can change the symptoms, we can change the thoughts, we can change the feelings, we take it piecemeal and try to sort of dissect it instead of taking a look at the whole. And I think what's really interesting around emotional regulation is so the definition of emotional regulation is how not to lose your friggin' mind. You will do well in this world. You will be successful and you will be most mentally well if you have the ability to stay calm in times of distress. And the only way you learn how to regulate emotion is somebody has to show you. Nobody can tell you. And part of the issue that we face, kids these days face, and certainly the mental health crisis, the underpinning to the mental health crisis is the fact that we're losing our ability to regulate emotion because we've never been this disconnected. And of course, what is required is connection. We often, when we're at our worst, when we're losing our friggin' minds, what we tend to need is somebody, just the physical presence of another human being to be like, okay, okay. And it is what happens universally when I put a crying infant in anybody's arms, regardless of age, race, religion, socioeconomic status, or gender identity. If I put a baby in anybody's arms, we're neurobiologically wired to engage in a rhythmic exchange, to soothe them. And it reminds me of this Ram Dass quote that I think about all the time. He said, we are all just here walking each other home. And none of us get out of here alive, you see. And when we are surrounded in our early years with people who are emotionally regulated, we learn how to do that. If you are surrounded by or have come from multiple generations of abuse, neglect, and trauma, the ability to regulate emotion is compromised in the people around you. And subsequently, you will not have that skill either. Okay. Those people who do best in this world, who are mentally well, the most well, have the ability to stay calm in times of distress or be surrounded by people who can do that. And oftentimes I think about the fact that, in just one generation, I mean, think about the square footage of the house that your grandfather was raised in and the square footage of the house in which we raise our babies. It's estimated, and this research gets me every time, it's estimated that our great grandparents looked at their children 72% more of the time than we look at our babies. And we're the first generation of parents who've had access to social media. Forget about the kids. Our children grew up with it. We're the first generation of parents that have so much access to our children and to social media. And we're inundated by tons of data every single day that our brains just aren't fucking ready for. And we need some breaks from our kids. My children can text me anytime, any moment, at any day. We put apps on the phones so that we know where our children are. You can watch how fast they're going in their cars. You can, like this occurred to me the other day. This is not like anywhere close to your question, but let me just tell you the story real quick. This mom said to me, I'm really worried about my kid. He just went to university. And he, his mental health is not okay. And, his father and I worry about him every night. And, we don't want to phone him too much, but we put this app on his phone so that I can see where he is. And so sometimes at night, his father and I, we just sit on our phones and we watch to see whether he's left his dorm room. And I think about what the fuck, like the cortisol that brings in that woman's body, right? The fact that this baby is going to have to figure his shit out on his own in some points. And, my mom said every weekend I would come home from college, she would wait up until I got home and slept. When she would then put me back, in the car and head me off to college, she was like, I slept so beautifully because there's nothing you could do. You would call me maybe every Tuesday, but in the meantime, I would just suppose, right? And so the ability to stay regulated is we have less and less opportunity to do that, which means many of us step into our days with our shoulders like this, ready, uncertainty, fear, no end in sight, the three components of the most dysregulated amongst us, and also the three components of a global pandemic, which as a globe we have just been through. So not just like we need to worry about Gaza this morning, or we need to worry about the people who have just survived floods or earthquakes. It is as a globe, we're stepping into this next season of whatever atrocities are before us with our shoulders like this. And so we're chippy and anxious, and we want to throat punch the mom at the hockey rink because she is lippy, right? Like we lose aspects of our kindness, and that's, really just the impetus of burnout.
It's so interesting. Like all the things that you're saying there resonate deeply. Like, and even we've noticed it, like we're in a healing profession, right? Like we're in a helping position, and people will phone us and we are like, here, open arms, we are ready. And they tell us to fuck off, like within the first 8 minutes, if it took too long to get on the phone.
Well, and I used to be nicer.
Never in my career have I had as much conflict with people as we have right now. And nothing about our work has actually changed. If anything, we're being innovative and creating more access, better access, like all the things, right? As we evolve to get better and better year over year. But I've never had as much conflict as I've had in my career as I do right this second, which is so fascinating.
And what do you notice about that? Just, patients demanding information, or just really being overwhelmed quickly?
Yeah, my line has been that our tolerance for turbulence has gone down, right? Like I think in most relationships, there's some turbulence, right? Your doctor's 5 minutes late for the appointment, or there was a question you had and you didn't feel like it quite got answered because you ran out of time, or a supplement you wanted is on back order and you need to wait for it for a week. Like there's turbulence in every relationship. And I think our resiliency, or lack thereof, is part of that decider of how capable we are of moving through that turbulence and maintaining the relationship as we move through it. I've lost patients in the last year because I was 8 minutes late. And these are people that I profoundly had impacted, and yet they could not withstand the discomfort of my lateness and would rather burn scorched earth, burn the entire, establishment down than just wait. And that's been so fascinating for me, because it's sad that, here we are, open arms, waiting to try and support. And yet that lack of resiliency is actually becoming the barrier to people being helped.
100%. And I think the other thing that I try to reflect on quite a bit too is that I am part of this dysregulated world too. And me, my team, we used to be nicer. Because we also survived the pandemic, and I'm also worried about whether I'm fucking up my kids and my marriage and my company and all of these things, right? And so although I used to be better, I think, because I'm also a part of that experience, and so I'm chippier. And when somebody gets dysregulated, I don't have as much space on any given day as I used to be like, whoa, tell me more, what's going on? Because the rate of that feedback is increasing. And, even just what I think about in the community outside of my professional role, like when I think about, watching parents at the hockey rink, or, watching people in traffic, or how they treat each other online. Like I'm mad before I even step into this work. And it becomes really tricky then to be able to be the regulator in this process. And I speak so much about, to organizations around, it's really not the people we serve that I'm worried about anymore. If we are not okay, the people we serve don't stand a chance. If our teams are not okay, the people we serve don't stand a chance. And historically in the human services profession, we've always been about, okay, so what resources do we have for the people? How are we serving our clients? How are the kids? And I, in the education space, I speak to teachers all the time because I think they do holy work. And I have said so blatantly so many times is that the kids are the least of my worries. I've assessed and treated over 1,000 kids in our country, and I have never, not one time, met a bad kid. But I have met a lot of emotionally dysregulated kids who need big people to be okay, to walk them through it. And big people have never been this fucked up, this burnt out, this exhausted, because of the system that has just been completely, our systems that have been inundated by data, and the proximity between humans has never been greater. And what we will never automate is relationship. We will never automate it, right? And we've had so many, and you know this too, but despite the fact that we're neurobiologically wired for connection, the hardest thing we will ever do is look into the eyes of the people we love. And now that we have so many exit ramps, our ability to refuel as practitioners, as people, has been significantly compromised in the last one generation. Because what do we do at the end of the night? We just feel so exhausted that we have a glass of wine or we watch Netflix. Like, I don't speak to my husband. I was thinking about this last night. We both got into bed for sure in our king size bed. I don't even know if he's fucking there. And we're both watching. He's learning how to launder money in the Ozarks, and I'm figuring out some kind of other fucking show, right? And we assume that we're having a relationship in this moment, but we're not. There's some days that come by and I'm like, didn't I tell you that? Or oh yeah, no, the kids are going here. And like, why did you reply on Team Snap 3 times? I also did. And if I just think about the difference that even my parents, but for sure my grandparents experienced, our bodies have not had the time to evolve in this short period of time. I mean, every night my grandparents would play 3 games of cribbage, right? They slept in beds that were this big. You had to figure your shit out, right? And there was no TV, right? Like you actually, to engage in dinner together was what you came home for, because you needed that, right? You couldn't wait maybe for your partner or your children to get off the bus, because it was that idea of like, oh, okay, how was it? The desire for human interaction was greater. Now in 2 generations, we're so inundated by it that it becomes like the thing we want to get away from. But it's what we need to be refueled by. Yeah. And so we're in this compromising state of, can we do it on purpose? And so many of us are we're not there yet.
Yeah, it's almost like I was thinking when you mentioned about the Teams thing there, because it's true. Like, I remember the day that I just sit down and record the new voicemail, right? That said, we do not tolerate threats and we do not tolerate harassment. Like,
I fucking cares. If I'm really mad, I'm not listening to that message anyway.
I know, but I never had that message before, and it's like, it's almost like
it's necessary now.
Responsive to, and so then like, as I'm recording it, I'm like, this really changes the tone of this message. Like, I tried to sound happy about not threatening us, but it's like, we don't tolerate threat.
Just throwing this out there, bitches. We just really don't want you to be assholery-ish. Okay, cool.
Full sentences in your emails, like, would just like, please. But you're right. Like, it's like the more like, but then that is a compensatory mechanism, like similar to tracking your kids going to school, right? I'm trying to tie it all together in my brain here. But like, as things get harder, we are building more systems, more automations, more like fake connections to try and, kind of cattle prod everybody into doing
the world of AI. Like, think about what's going to evolve in the remainder of our respective careers, right? How compromising it becomes when somebody Googles a diagnosis and then sort of, wants to go through all of that data, which is beautiful. I mean, I think we need to advocate for ourselves and, learn these things and do all those things. But if I think about now, in our lifetime, I'm sure we will see the development of AI that is intended to do many of the jobs that we do as humans, right? And part of the interaction between doctor and patient is the human connection, is the physical sense of, do you got me? Do you see me? Do you feel the change in neurochemistry that happens in the physical presence of two humans, right? You can't fucking automate that. You can expedite the process, and I understand the ease of being able to, like technological advances are not the problem. It's how we use it that is the issue. Because I like that we can do a telehealth for northern communities. I love that, I can get my kids connected to their cousins in the United States who they only see once a year. Or when, grandmother's on a holiday in Europe, we can all be like, okay, yeah, no, everybody's good here. Like all of that is great. And the concern for me is that we will automate, because the hardest thing we will do is look into the eyes of the people we love. We will want to make that easier because we don't want to do hard things. And the cost will be great. And we'll be like, what the fuck happened? We made this so expedited. We made this so accessible for people. How come this is so easy? You can see 67 patients in a day. Not one feels seen. And that is the impetus to physical and mental health.
Yeah, I would argue the doctor doesn't feel great at the end of that day either.
What am I doing? Right? Like that's not why I got into this business either. Not to run patients through and like, hurry up, right? No. And if I ask that of a teacher, right? When you get back to literacy and numeracy, is that why you got into it? No, it wasn't about test scores. Well, we're getting back to this idea that we're missing up test scores and we need to get kids up to these certain standards. Fuck off. You can't get a kid to a standard if they're emotionally dysregulated. I don't care what your pedagogy looks like. If a kid does not feel seen and emotionally regulated, they cannot learn. Even if you got shit flying out of your whiteboards, doesn't matter. It does not matter because you are not neurobiologically able to take in that information. So, well, I didn't realize we got into this to be social workers. Then get the fuck out. Because if you're not in this business, in a human services profession, to be able to develop some sort of a relationship, and it doesn't need to take a long time. This is what people, if I think about, sometimes you can not only change a life, you can save it with a nod. You can grab a hand and look somebody in the eye. It can take 30 seconds. You can give the prerequisite to say, listen, I am sorry I am late today. You matter so much to me. The context of today is I had a suicidal patient that I did not want to leave, but I am here for you now. How we do that becomes tricky, and we don't have a script for it, you see, because we've never had to be able to make these transitions and look people in the eye so intently as we do now, because we are so internally focused, right? I'm always worried about what are people fucking saying about me, and oh my god, do they think I'm too loud, or I swear too much, or I didn't do this, or like, are people judging me as a mother? Why did I marry Aaron? What is wrong? And then when I'm serving my patients, I'm often not in with them because I'm so introspectively focused, right? Because we spend a lot of time here.
Let's talk about friends for a second, because this is I want to move it to talking about friends just on the heels of what you said there, because, and I said to you before I hit record, I was like, I've always wanted to do a podcast on like failed female friendships, because I feel like this is such a thing. It's like our lives are so full. We have these fake connections where we send each other memes sometimes, but we lack the actual connection. And it's interesting because when I reflect on I'm going to call them failures, but growth, learning moment, friendship situations over the last 3 years, if I'm wearing my big empathy hat, I go, we all were going through a lot, and so is she. But then the selfish part of myself goes, yeah, but wasn't my friendship worth fighting for, And so I find that so hard, because we have all been through a lot of shit, and we are letting each other off the hook all over the place, because we can see she's busy. We can see she's a single mom. We can see she lost her job. And so we're giving her the permission to not be a good friend. But then at the same time, we also would like some friends, and how do we be a good friend to that person if we can't connect with them? I've had all of these thoughts, but I'm not the right person to rip that apart. And so I would love to hear what you think about it.
Oh my gosh, I think you are the right person, because all of us are really, I think, in this place of wanting to know we matter. right? And this is the heart of couples therapy. It is such a dance. And when you first fall in love with somebody, whether it is, your partner or a friend, we all go through that very early stage of honeymoonish, and we try to decide whether we're fits for each other, and this is true in friendship, right? This happens a lot. And what I think is really critical in our place of, women in particular, is that we I think naturally evolve from a place of sort of gathering lots of friends. I mean, it's almost neurobiologically important to sort of think that more is more, right? And we spend a lot of time in our 20s, even our late teens, sort of collecting. I got this and this and this and all this and this and this, and it's very superficial. And if we're lucky, some of those friendships go deeper, which really requires, part of the issue that I think we talk a lot about today is that our breadth of relationships are easy to do because it can be so superficial. The depth takes time, and the ability to navigate conflict is the biggest indicator of relationships that last. And so many of us, which takes two people, because if you're in a relationship that really matters, conflict will be a part of it. And what you do with that conflict depends on your ability to engage in the dance with that other human being. Okay. And oftentimes, when we get busier, when we get our own children and other things in our lives start to take priority, right? In our 20s, we can actually make our friends the priority, typically, so much easier. Okay. And so it's easy to feel seen in a relationship, and we're doing fun stuff. We're shopping. We might go drinking. We might do all of those kind of things, right? When we get a little bit older, we're not as fun all the time, right? Because what we're dealing with is like, fuck, is my business going to succeed? Or, I have this goal. And you sort of then have to refine some of those relationships. And I think, early in my career, I said to somebody who's a very successful woman who was a mentor of mine, I said, what is the thing that surprises you the most about your success? And she said, how many friends I've lost. And I said, wow, really? Tell me more about that. And she said, there is so much about it. It's lonely at the top, heavy is the head that wears the crown. She said, I don't know that that's necessarily true, because I think it is really about the depth of relationships that you have in those moments. And it's like how you get to decide then who is in that same space as you, whether, they want to build a company or they want to, change the definition of the role as a woman. I have, many girlfriends who didn't want to change that role or weren't in a place where that's not their desire. And so that's at odds for me because I don't fucking get that. Right. But they also don't get this. So we can have a conversation about, like, I think you're really letting your kids down. And I can say back to them, well, I don't think you're showing your kids how to live your dreams. Right. If you're not happy in this place, then what the fuck are you doing? Well, I want to be there every day to take my kid to school and drop them off to school. Okay. Then that's your plan. And it doesn't mean that we necessarily will never be friends again, or that she's wrong and I'm right. But this isn't the people in my very limited time that I want to spend my time with, right? Because who you surround yourself, when you sit with the winners, the conversation is different, whatever that looks like, okay? And so I think we do this refining, if you're smart, of deciding who you're going to spend your precious time with. If you are working on your relationship with your partner, if you are keeping a relationship with your children, if you are working at your business, whatever that looks like, the people who then get that sacred space of you because you're pretty fucking amazing should be the people that lift you up. And I see so many women try to keep all of those relationships going, and it is impossible. You're trying to be everything to everybody, something will fail. And I'm just at a place in my life where I will not compromise the time that I have with my children or my husband. And building this dream, changing the world, is the most important thing to me, because I know my kids are watching, and I know I'm a better human when to my husband, who is fucking amazing, when I do the things that fill my soul. And so who's going to come along for the ride with that? Like, fuck, I can tell you maybe 5 that I wish beautiful women who I would have loved to grow old with, that just didn't have the same hopes, dreams, ideas that I did. And it doesn't mean that I hope we don't have coffee every once in a while, or we don't have all of these things, but who I spend the most time with are the ones that make me go like this when I see them. And that's the definition, right? And that will just be the growth. And that's probably the hardest fucking thing about this, building a company, letting friends go, hiring friends, because that's how it tends to happen, right? You love people and you bring them in and you want to do great things. And then, gosh, losing those relationships, and then you watch what happens when some of those get severed, then who is able to repair? I've also had those beautiful things where I've had some of the hardest breakups. And then I know that, I'm surrounded by some pretty amazing people when we can come back together and figure it out. And then there's many that don't, and that's okay too.
I love that put that up against like some of your big dreams and goals. I think I resonate with that big time, right? It's almost like I kind of want to have both. I want to have it both ways, right? I want to have the quaint neighborhood where people cook in each other's kitchen and someone's let themselves in and taken my butter. But also I would like that person to be a fucking badass entrepreneur who's also changing the world, and you maybe can't have both of those things at the same time because that woman actually lives 3 time zones away from me and I never get to see her, right?
Fair. But I don't think you should compromise either way, because I think that it's still quite possible in my moments of like sitting in the campfire with the backyard at the neighbors who, may not be the people I grow old with or tell my deepest, darkest business dreams to. I'm still going to do those things in some ways with my respective time, right? But I think what is really critically important is knowing your top 3, your top 4, and then whoever then fits in after that, fantastic. I mean, our children, I don't know, how many children do you have? Children?
I have 2. Yeah.
2. So what often happens, as you know, is that their social activities determine who you spend a lot of time with. And so I enjoy that opportunity, because there's not a lot of people who maybe I would have known in the community or specifically chose. And being a professional in the community also, I tend to spend a lot of time away. I live in a tiny town, right? Many people who I interact with every day have been my patients, or I know something about them, or there's a confidentiality issue that we just sort of like, so it's not that becomes, the dual relationships become even more compromising in those situations, right? So I think, in Feeling Seen, I talk a lot about the importance of like, who are your people? Who are the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 that will kick you in the ass and be your biggest fans? Keep those ones close. Those are the relationships you invest in the most. And then after that, whatever you have time for, be kind and don't tolerate bullshit, in that order. That's it.
What would be the red flags? Like if you're thinking, if someone's starting to like question, the people that are in their circle, and maybe they're going, oh, like I actually am spreading myself thin. I actually do have like 8 or 9 people that I'm trying to please right now. Like, how do we know the difference in those early stages between the friends that are going to, be able to repair and be able to tolerate turbulence, to use my word, versus those more fleeting campfire, yeah, I'll see you next year kind of experiences?
Trust your intuition, because I think I want you to know how you feel when you step in their presence. When Marty, who I showed you, is in the room with me, so we met as hockey moms, okay, and we were doing a time clock at 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning, because our sons were on the same hockey team. I was fucking late. I didn't even have a bra on. She shows up. She's got copies and she's printed out all of the instructions to work the score clock. And I was like, oh, I love you. Do you want a job? And she was like, actually, like I have a diploma in business administration. I would do you need somebody in your company? And I was like, yep. Now we're business partners. We've been together almost a decade, and I adore her. And she has become the person that I bounce everything off of. She is as invested in this dream, and probably more than me in some days. And I think it's about really how you feel when you're in their presence that really dictates whether it is going to be something you need in this season of your lifetime. And when she walks in the room, it's funny, I was doing a live story yesterday, and I heard her voice in the office, and I was like, right? I mean, we see each other every fucking day, but I love the sound of her laugh. I love that she is so committed to this. I love watching her as a mom. Like she's remarkable. And then there's other people who I know who, of course, I will spend time with or I have to interact with, but I don't feel that same connection to, or in fact, even the opposite. Like it feels like work and exhausting, and I don't trust where the conversation is going to go, or if they're talking, a lot about other people, like, whatever that is. I'm just like, not my people, not my people. And that's okay to know, right? So then I'm going to invest very minimally in that. But that doesn't mean that, that they're not amazing or that they don't have a particular story in their respective lifetime. It's just like in this moment, it's just not just where I'm going to land.
I love that. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about the people, right? That
Yeah.
that
How
do
does it
that for
feel
you,
when you,
right?
yeah,
Hmm.
when you step into that? Is there a vulnerability there? And I really want to be in authentic relationships, right? I put I mean, different than many people, but I put my life on social media a lot. I'm very vulnerable on the podcast and, do all of these kind of things. And so there's a lot of people who probably know more about me than I will ever know about them. And so the issue then becomes who do I want to know more about? Right? Because I'll be a fucking amazing friend. I promise you that. Right? When we establish that relationship. And I think that, I have two of my best friends. We started kindergarten together and we were in each other's weddings and we're godparents to each other's kids. And I feel very, very lucky, very blessed to have had those relationships for, I mean, however, almost 50 years. And it's like I step into the presence of Tanis and I don't even have to speak. Right. I can just, I've hugged her so many times when the world has fallen apart around me that the thought of her makes me melt. And she's a teacher. We took completely different career paths. I talk about the fact that, I was standing at the foot of the Eiffel Tower on our 30th birthday year. She was breastfeeding a baby and I was single in Europe. Like our lives could not be more fucking different. Right. But there's something about her that feels like home. And it doesn't, we don't even have to be doing the same things in our lives. You don't have to just surround yourself with like business women who want to fucking change the world. It can also be that person who's just like, been there from the beginning and knows your story. Right. I think that's also true. Right. So the feeling that you have worked so hard to get to this position. You matter so much to so many people in this moment. Being around people who are worth working through a conflict with, you'll know that if you let yourself feel it.
That's such good advice. Tell us about your book, because I want our listeners to know what their next move is, which is going to be to read your latest book. But who is it for and what do they get out of it?
Yeah, it's called Feeling Seen. And I wrote it, I was writing it during the pandemic. But mostly, I'd written the first book called Kids These Days. And it was really about relationships and, with kids and parents and teachers and how big people are so important in developing emotional regulation in kids. And it's funner than I'm making it sound. But anyway, so when I wrote Feeling Seen, it was really more about how the fuck do we survive this world? Right. So how do we lead and love in this disconnected world? Why are we so fucked up? How do we get back to each other? And how do we get there again when we're lost? And so it was a book that I wrote for me and, it became a national bestseller. It's doing fantastic. And I love it. And then the podcast was the spinoff. That is really the place where I just wanted to create a community where people can land when they have those questions about, do I matter? What do I do with friendships? Why is the world so fucked up? What do we really need? And I don't think there is one answer. I think we need to revisit it as often as we can to just drop our shoulders, because left to our own devices, we do this. And so I wanted just to really create a place where you could land to sort of do that every time you forget.
I love that. And I feel like that stepping into like relationships with that level of leadership does require so much courage. And so it's nice to have a book that kind of, I don't know what the right word is. It's like it's mirroring that level of courage that it takes to be vulnerable, to show up for people, to look at your own shit and say, Jordan, did you change the tone of the office when you recorded an anti-harassment voicemail?
Oh my God, I love how you're processing this in real time. I love how you're processing this in real time. You're like, that's how it felt when I gave the message. I wonder how that's being received. Fuck, what did my
Is
staff think
that
about
making people madder?
that? Did
Like we said, don't harass us, but is
you
that
just
making
done therapy?
people choose violence?
With Dr. Robertson in real time.
But I love that that's like, because it does. And I even feel as leadership's hard, right? And I
Oh,
think we don't talk enough about that it's like, oh, you have to choose it and you have to try to be good and better every day and all the time. And it's exhausting.
we are trained as doctors. You are trained as a naturopath. I'm trained as a psychologist. Nobody fucking trained me to be a leader. I don't know. People would say to me in the beginning of building this company, like, do you have a strategy? Do you have a strategic plan? I was like, I don't even fucking know what that is. Like, well, what about, like, do you have a policy and a procedure on this, for your employees? Well, fuck, I don't know. Right? Well, how do you fire somebody? Jesus Christ, why would I have to fire somebody? Well, we think this, holy, like, nobody talks about those things. And so this is so true in many organizations, for sure in medicine, but, in many of our sort of patriarchal, hierarchical organizations, you come into these positions being something very different and you get put into a position of leadership. And it's a completely different role than, a naturopathic doctor or a psychologist is not nobody trained me to be a leader. And it is the people skills that really become so critically important in that process to allow us to be able to do the thing that we're trained for.
If you had the chance to write one more chapter for your book, what would it be?
Oh God, I think it would really be about, I really want to focus on women in leadership. And I think that I was reading, this brilliant take on roles and freedom and how the role of women and men have never been this unclear. And we don't do well with a lack of clarity, right? So we've come from a generation, that had very clear roles. You knew if you were born with a vagina, this was your job, generally speaking. And if you're born with a penis, this was your job. There was very little freedom. Now, in just 1.5 generations, we have a fuck ton of freedom. Women can be anything, do anything. You can identify however you want. You could love whoever you want. You can, all of those things that I embrace to the core of me. But the cost is we don't have a fucking clue what our roles are. The lack of role clarity is so disconcerting for our partners, for us, for the people who watch us in communities, for our mother-in-laws. My mother-in-law, had said to me, like, well, what's going to happen when you're on the road all the time and the kids get sick? And I was like, well, fuck if I know. Like, I mean, your son knows how to handle Tylenol, but that's not her script. Right. And like, is this a compromising thing for our children? And then the question becomes to me as maybe she's right. We don't have a role for that. And then now when I'm the primary breadwinner in our marriage, I come from, I'm married to a guy that was born on a farm. He's the oldest son of 3. His job was to care for us. That was what his dad did. Yeah. And so now how do we rewrite this script about the fact that, no, like, you married a powerful woman for a reason. Remember that? Yeah. Well, I just didn't think you were going to be this fucking powerful. I know. So now we got to figure that out together. Right. Right. Because this can be good for both of us. But now that means you're at every hockey practice. Like, is this cool? Like, are we going to survive this is the question, because we're rewriting the script because there's no role that's clear these days. And that's hard because it makes us question everything. It makes guilt come into everything, and as it should. But when there's a lack of clarity, there will be that angst. But the payoff is the freedom, I think.
There's so many things in what you just said where I'm like, oh, that's my life, actually.
Right? Right? And it
Yeah.
is we're up against that previous generation that parented the way that they knew how, and we are learning a different way because kids these days are so different in terms of their ability, their access to technology that we don't have a script for. And so the way that we show up as women in our communities and our roles in our marriages has changed so significantly, and the rules that we're playing by are only those that have come before us.
Yeah, I would love for you to write about feminine leadership. I feel like that would be because I think about that often, about how important and powerful feminine leadership is, but also how hard it is, right? It's like you actually, to lead the way you want to lead equals having your heart broken sometimes as a feminine leader. But you actually wouldn't want it the other way, right? Like, and I talk to this often about the women in my circle. It's like, we get our heart broken all the time, but the opposite of that would be not leading in the way that we want to lead.
Sure. And I say this to organizations all the time, when we do consultation, I truly believe the future is female. And not because this isn't about penises or vaginas. I have 2 sons and a daughter. I think that, my hope is our sons will be as successful as our daughters. The idea is women have an emotional language, historically speaking, that is far more developed, evolved than men. We all feel the same emotions, regardless of how you identify. But we have a place to put them. And now at the head of leadership tables, what we need is somebody who can identify emotions, talk about emotional regulation, get us back to the best parts of ourselves, to be able to produce and be innovative and creative and kind. If we lead historically by policy, procedure, structure, budget, blah, 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 which is what we needed to do when we built the infrastructure of our countries 2 generations ago, right? The rules have now changed. We need somebody who can bring us back together, look us in the eye, say, something's not right. What do you feel? You're acknowledged in this place. I'm so grateful for you. Because when people are acknowledged, they rise. We will never automate that. And we need the good acknowledgers around the table these days.
Jody, thank you so much for sharing with me. I said this before we hit record. I feel like we could talk for like 2 days and there would be 9,000 swear words in the recording.
Yeah.
Between the 2 of us. But I'm so grateful to be able to share your message with our audience. Where can they find you? Where can they find your book?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So Feeling Seen is across any major platform, Amazon and all the bookstores. Our podcast is Everyone Comes From Somewhere. And we launch an episode every Thursday. So I would love to have your community be a part of ours. And we're always on social media, drjodycarrington.com.
Love it. And we'll put the links to all of those things in the show notes so you can flip back and make sure that you follow and find Jody's work because it's really important. Thank you so much for being here today with me, Jody.
Thank you for having me, Jordan.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.